Okay. All right. It is 5 after. Let's go ahead and get started. And also, welcome to Claudia from Sports Engine in Minneapolis. Thanks for posting in the chat window. So today's topic is really exciting, and it's a joint webinar brought to you by Cypress.io and GoDaddy. And one of the things that I found this story really interesting because it's a technology story as well as an organizational transformation story as well. We're going to actually go through a couple demos and give you a peek into how Cypress is used within GoDaddy, but then also the GoDaddy team is going to take you through the process of how they started implementing quality and creating that culture of quality through test automation within that organization. So let's go ahead and dive in, but one quick detail. This webinar will be recorded, and we will send a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording. One other point is that it will contain a link to a post-event survey. So completing that survey will get you a free Cypress.io t-shirt from us. It is a great t-shirt. It's guaranteed to provide a soft, comfortable fit, and it will increase your confidence shipping quality websites by 20%. So you definitely want to fill out that survey and get our awesome t-shirt. We will also make this available on Cypress.io on our blog and our website in the next week or so. So that said, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A window, and we will make sure to get through as many of them at the end of the webinar, where we'll have a dedicated QA section. So today's presenters, the stars of today's show are the GoDaddy team. So I'm joined by Pablo Velasquez, Stephen Camiso, and Colia Venturi. They'll take over in just a moment. I'm Stephen Yee, Vice President of Marketing at Cypress.io. So in today's talk, we're actually going to talk through this entire journey that the Cypress team has gone through over the past year or two. So they'll be talking about what they're doing with GoDaddy and GoCentral and their GoCentral product, and making sure that there's a flawless experience with their 18 million customers worldwide and the 77 million domain names under management. And we'll talk through some of the pain that they were experiencing in making sure that they were shipping that user experience painlessly, and the journey that they went through to actually transform the organization, making QA a top priority within their organization, and the quantifiable results and impact it brought on the way that they ship software and the way that they're actually doing QA automation. Some of the key learnings that they've learned along the way through experimentation with other resources, other frameworks, but then also lessons learned utilizing Cypress.io. And then they'll talk about what's next, what they're planning on doing more of in the future, as well as wrapping up with, again, some questions that you may have on either their technical approach or how they were actually able to influence other people in the organization. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hand this over to the GoDaddy team. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Pablo. So I'll start off by talking a little bit about the part of the website. If you went to GoDaddy.com right now, what is the part that we work on? The main part is you can see on the left there is the editor. So basically build yourself a website. And a lot of what we do too is on the right there is when you log in to create your onboarding experience, basically create your website. Now, we'll talk more about it in the next slide, but basically our team, what's special about our team, we're the growth team, is that we interact with a lot of different parts of GoDaddy. The editor tends to be by itself. So when you test it, and we're using Selenium, it was easy to be very focused and look at a widget, look at a specific screen, and test it right there. For growth team, the problem became a little bit different because you have to go through front of site to hit us. We also do a lot of upgrading, so we have to go through e-com and we have to deal with that team. And really, we deal with at least more than a dozen teams. So we were kind of a special situation, and that's when we started thinking about trying something besides Selenium that we've been doing for a few years now. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go forward. But what I did want to tell you in this slide was just that that's our product, and our team works on it, and it is a little bit of why we went with Cypress. And the next slide, let me tell you about our team structure. So our team structure, like I mentioned before, we're the growth team. It's pretty standard, I think. You have a manager, we have a UX engineer to make everything look great for our customers, and dev manager, product manager. I'm the asset. We have a lot of devs. And now what's becoming a little more interesting for us is that, while I'm an estet on the growth team, I'm also part of my own estet QA team. And then on top of that, if you see the bigger box, we're actually part of a QA guild across GoDaddy. So we are able to share a lot of these ideas and actually, also challenge these ideas to experiment with new things, or say, you know what, why don't we just vet this a little more, or maybe this is not going to work with this system. I think that's one of the key successes to this project, was getting a lot of feedback across the QA teams. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll tell you what are the challenges that we faced with Selenium. Again, this is not definitely no negative Selenium stuff here. I personally love Selenium, and you're going to find in another few slides how we're integrating Selenium and Cypress together. But when we started this process, we wanted the growth team to go through flows instead of being focused just on, say, rotating an image in the editor, and go through ecom and go through all these different teams, right? And for those flows, we needed something we can ramp up quickly, and if there was a maintenance issue, we could fix it fast. With Selenium, we found that getting developers to do the Selenium test was a little bit of work, because you basically have to be kind of an expert in UI test writing to use Selenium. And we run into a number of issues trying to grow the team to everybody writing UI tests. And we really tried really hard for a while. And then when Cypress came on board, we said, you know what, let's look at this. Let's see what the developer experience is. Let's see what they feel, and if they want to try this new tool. And the point of it all was because we want to have high velocity, meaning we want to be able to put a lot of features out and a lot of fixes, and we want to trust all that, right? So this is kind of a standard feature for UI test writing. And also the complexity of the growth team in the tests that we were writing was really, really complicated. Like I said, doing the upgrades and going through different teams. And we were having all these problems with waiting when you purchase, say, a domain on the cart. We were waiting too long. And I think anyone who works with Selenium knows that sometimes that's a little bit of a trouble, is when you're waiting for elements. And then we needed more advanced features for mocking data. And we know that we could have instituted this in Selenium, and we researched it too. But we found that we just got a lot of amazing mocking out of the box with Cypress with no extra work. So that's another thing, another capabilities from Cypress that we wanted to go with. And then the test coverage, again, QA doing the UI testing was just not going to work in this scenario. We needed everybody on board. We needed everybody writing tests, and we needed to have them writing fast and a lot. So the test coverage needed to be pretty widespread. So that's another reason we started looking more towards Cypress. But let me tell you, let's let Steve here at GoDaddy tell you a little bit about the experience for developers with Selenium. Steve, you want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. So really, you probably kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. Our growth team is a little bit different. We're not working on, we work in the GoCentral core product, but what we're focused on is everything related to e-commerce and onboarding people into the product. So that means people who are signing up for new accounts at GoDaddy, people who have existing accounts at GoDaddy, people who might have credit card data on file, people who might already have domains purchased at GoDaddy. All of those different things are different test states that we need to be able to test in our user interface, because we display different things depending on which bucket a shopper falls into. And with Selenium, we basically had a test bank of shoppers, and we had this kind of a checkout system where you could tag an account, and that account would have those different attributes, like, is it a user with credit card data? Is it a user with domains? Is it a user with some other property? And you could check it out, run the test, check that shopper back in. But with growth, when we're actually dealing with tests that change the state, we can't do that. And the other problem we run into is In Selenium, one of the things we do is we would kind of scaffold the test by injecting dummy data into our database, right? So if we want an account that's in a specific state, we could just write into our database through our API using admin tools to set up an account exactly in the state we want to test, and then the UI test could run. But again, since with growth team, since we're dealing with external dependencies, we don't have access to do that. So that's where really the mocking framework provided by Cypress comes in handy. So not only do we have test states that are determined by account requirements, but on top of that, we run a lot of feature flags and A/B tests, and even complicating it further, there could be feature grandfather dates, meaning like accounts created after or before a certain date might have features that accounts after a certain date don't have. And all that leads to explosion in permutation of test setup states. And on top of that, our e-commerce platforms in our development and test environments can be flaky because those teams they're doing development as well. So the ability to mock both API calls and, as we'll demonstrate later, we're using our application is a React application. We're using Redux to maintain state. We can actually modify state directly from the tests and basically bypass all these API calls we need to get accounts in a specific state, because all those would lead up to create a certain shopper in a specific state. Not only would we be creating a bunch of test accounts on other platforms, but the setup would take probably a minute or so just to run a 10-second test. So Pablo, if you want to take it from here.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about the slide. I noticed that somebody did ask a question about that. This is what Steve was talking about with the challenges. And also a little bit between the other slide too, but if we can go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about, once we knew that, okay, Cypress is going to be something we're going to work with. It has a lot of features that are specific to our situation and we want to go forward. Just to give you a history, a little bit of how we do things here. We've switched our UI framework a couple of times. We were C#, we were in Ruby, and we ended up in Node. So the decision to go forward with the new technology, especially for a big company, is not an easy one, and you have to get a lot of consensus from management, from your peers, from development. And in order to do that, we had to kind of have a consensus strategy. And to accomplish this, there's a lot of evangelism that takes place. We set up a bunch of hackathons to demonstrate Cypress working and how it could be integrated into our system. We had to have discussions with the QA team saying, look, this is what we want to do, and then get the feedback from them. And if they didn't agree, or saying, like we said before, Selenium is a good system. We have trusted it for a long time. What are the advantages here? What are we getting by switching to Cypress in this scenario? Again, these are things that we, like Steve from Cypress said earlier, it isn't just a technical question. It's a people question. It's an org question. And we have to vet it enough and review it enough that everyone is on board and feels like this is a good decision long-term, because you're investing quite a bit of your effort and talent in here. And we also did a developer survey because we wanted to know, hey, is this really going to work? Are developers really going to like this? Or are we just going to tell them, this is the new way we're going to do it? That's not really going to get us very far. So we wanted, again, everyone to be on board with this and have conclusive evidence that, yes, this is a sensible decision. This is a good thing to do for us. And like I said before, for the editor, we use Soft Labs. We use, a lot of different editors, not just Chrome, but IE and Edge and things like that. So we wanted to keep some of that too still. Again, we have to have a balanced decision that we have to make. And once we got everybody on board and we researched them, we had the hackathons, and people saw that this was a good step going forward. If you go to the next slide, it's still part of the history here. Once we figured all that out, just to let you know, we evaluated quite a few frameworks over time. We've evaluated them here. I personally did, I think, every one of these, at least one sample test just to see how it would work. We decided to go with Cypress because the community docs are just outstanding. I know WebDriver.io is a good one too. I think everybody agrees on that, but the community docs for Cypress are just amazing. There's other features too, like the dashboard that we're going to show you later. The live execution is just a hands down wow moment for everyone who tries Cypress. and is one of the biggest advantages to developer adoption. So we had quite a few on the pro column to go forward with this choice. And if we go to the next one, I can get more now into the, this is a developer survey. I didn't mock any of these. These are real quotes from people. And I tried to, put everything, even if it wasn't super positive. Like, for example, the last one talks a little bit about when you start doing Cypress, you got to remember to add custom library code. Because what we learned was we had built a system in Selenium for years. When we started with Cypress, even though it was high developer adoption and we were doing great, we still needed to do some catch-up work on building out those custom functions that we were going to use. For example, a common login function, right? Just all these common things that you use day to day. So you're going to have to build that out. But in general, the developer response was overwhelmingly positive. I mean, the surveys were like 80, 90%. Everybody really liked it, which was what the key to making this work. We wanted a lot of hands on deck, and that's what Cypress brought with it. If we go to the next slide, we're gonna get into basically what I was talking about earlier, which was the consensus that we got from QA, from devs, from the product team, to push that everybody gives thumbs up, and we say, yes, this is a big shift. It's a risk too, but we feel that this is going to work. And then we engaged in an experiment that took a long time. I mean, upwards, basically kind of like a year. We did 9 months hardcore coding, but it really took a year. Again, not a light decision, right? Because this is a big step we're taking here. So once we had everybody on board and we agreed that this was a good choice, we went forward and we started working on it. If you want to go to the next one, the next slide. Yeah, so here's just a sample test for you. It became really easy to write these tests. And again, with Selenium, like I said, over years, we learned a few things about compartmentalizing code and don't repeat yourself and all these kind of stuff. And when we talk about the next steps, we'll talk about that later. But as we build out the test, we'll move in that direction too with Cypress. But for now, what we really wanted was anybody can just get on a laptop, make a quick test, use the tools available that Cypress provides, and get it done and get it reliable and keep on moving. And this definitely happens with Cypress, and we've seen it over and over again. We're going to show you a little demo of a test running, and I can tell you a little bit about some of the advantages we got with Cypress here. I mean, I think the wow moment is right there, right? You're seeing it run. You're seeing all these calls. We did intentionally blur out the behind the scenes calls there, but this is extremely useful. You're seeing what's happening at every part of your test. There's a lot of other things too. Like, for example, here when we're doing the upgrade, that's where Steve was talking about. We're talking to the ecom team. Like I said, for growth, we were going through flows and we needed all this integration with teams. And you saw the wait time on that one was a little bit long, right? Here we are setting up a widget. These are really dynamic tests. And behind the scenes, we're talking to a lot of people and we have to wait. And we didn't want to do all these timeouts and waits. And Cypress is really great about that. It knows when to wait for things and it knows when to click on things. And the developer experience is just amazing. So this is the general run of how our tests go. If you go to the next slide, here's a dashboard. Like the video that you just saw, if you click on that little arrow, you're gonna see that the videos can play. This was a huge factor in our maintenance ability. Can we go back to the dashboard one? Yeah. This really helps a lot because when you can look at your test and see what broke really fast, like in 5 seconds, I know, oh, you know what, the modal change, I need to change that button. And I go back, I make the code change, I check it in, and then we're done. This dashboard has been really, really helpful for us. We're also using parallelization, but again, we'll talk about that in the next steps. Anyway, so again, the dashboard is really useful to us, and we use it every day. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, now that we talked about, we agreed to do it. Here's us using it. Here's a demo. Here's the dashboard. What was the impact? And we did this by going through our repos and look at contributions from people of the team and what the output was. So we tried to be as diligent as we could about measuring all this for the last year for Cypress and for the last 4 years for Selenium. And we found that with a very small team, we could produce a lot more tests And I think the maintenance, I know a lot of times we talk about building out tests, but the maintenance is a huge cost, honestly. That ended up being a really great decrease there. You can see these numbers are real, and we all vetted them, and we feel pretty confident about them. We're not making anything up. I think one number that we don't have in here is that we were all wearing our Cypress T-shirts, so that 20% goes in there somewhere. So make sure you do that survey. One main thing too to talk about is the less manual testing. Because Cypress is easy to write the tests in for anybody, we started pushing more and more do a test for a lot of things that before we said, well, tests are really expensive to write. They take a long time. We have to really work on them. But because Cypress makes it so easy to write a test, we said, you know what, just write a test so we don't have to keep manually testing this over and over again. And that is a huge time saving. It's not just for QA, but for developers, for everybody really. And it gives you a really boost in confidence. So we started moving to basically, even though there's less manual testing there, in our team, we're trying to talk about zero manual testing. We're trying to be extreme about it and use Cypress as much as we can. There's other stuff that we did too to make this run very well and fast, which is test parallelization. Cypress gets you that out of the box. So that was pretty easy to set up. If you go to the next slide, I think it's a little more on the results and impact. I think, at least for me personally, the biggest shift that I saw was that a lot of times, because of the cost of maintenance and writing the tests and that we'd had in the past, we started to push the test toward the end because it was like kind of a little bit like a chore. But with Cypress, because it becomes a little easier and because it's like you start from the video that you can really see what's going on really fast, we started moving all the test writing to the beginning, to the point that in the development team now, when you join the team itself, like we had some new hires, the first thing you do is you write a Cypress test. And I feel that it's an advantage definitely to understanding how the team works, how the features work. And now we're moving to, like I mentioned before, zero manual testing, where now if you're gonna touch anything you're writing a new feature, but you're also refactoring some code at the same time. So we're saying, look, write a regression test while you're at it too. And then when the QA team gets to look at the feature that you're working on, you give them a link to your Cypress test, and I click a button and it runs. And I don't need half an hour of like Coley explain to me what he was doing and why he was doing it. I watch the test run. I know what he's talking about. I can quickly do edge cases. It is just an efficiency gain. And I think that's the main point that we have found, at least in our team with Cypress, is that we're seeing an efficiency gains in all these different areas that we didn't expect, actually. Honestly, when we started, we thought, okay, developers writing tests, that's kind of was a big push. But now we're finding, oh, wow, we have all these other gains in different parts of the development process. Oh, there it is, the no manual testing. Again, like Steve had mentioned, we helped with our complex test cases. It helped us with e-commerce. And mocking is a huge thing, and we're going to be talking about it pretty soon. But I wanted to let you know, just from my perspective, the big gain was that the culture of testing with using UI tests has really started to change in our team. And I think that's because of Cypress and how it makes it really easy to write those tests. Coley, I'm handing it over to you. I think we're at the next slide is the mocking stuff. Almost? Okay. So, before we get there, sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. Before we get there, so one thing that we really did, if you're going to get to the day-to-day experience of working with Cypress, we did have a few learnings here. We actually did write a blog, and a lot of these learnings are in very great detail there. Hopefully, we have a link at the end of the slides here. So, for working day-to-day with Cypress, we had a few things to do, like setting the base URL. We learned that we needed to make every test needed to be in its own file. I know they're working on things like that, running parallel tests. And we had working on retries. I know the main feature's coming out, so we used a workaround right now for retries and using parallel. We did it running to a mocking large response object because one of our response objects is really big. So that forced us to start looking into different kinds of mocking. And I think I now am on the right track here. And the next slide is about mocking. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So Coley, it's all you.
Awesome. So one of the huge gains that we've been able to have using Cypress is writing what we've been referring to as visual unit tests. Earlier on, you saw a demo of one of our pretty complex, like true end-to-end flows. We're touching multiple teams, calling a lot of APIs. There's just a lot of stuff happening. But sometimes if something else on a team we can't control is not working properly, our tests go down. So we started exploring ways that we can get around that. And the power that Cypress allows with a lot of customizability and ease of use is that we can do stuff like what you're seeing on your screen right now, which is part of our Redux mocking. So like Steve from GoDaddy mentioned earlier, we are a React application, so we use Redux as a state manager. And with some simple Cypress hooks, and if you move on to the next slide, we'll see on the left hand, we have our actually just the tiny bit of code that allows us to do this. This is actually exposing the get state and dispatch methods directly into Cypress. And what this allows us to do is basically mock any state in the editor application, effectively bypassing parts of the app that may not even be pertinent to the test we're trying to run. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see actually an example of that. So what you're seeing here in that little highlighted portion is just some simple mocks. We're dispatching some different config items and adding some new data into the Redux state. And these 3 lines otherwise would require maybe a couple minutes or a minute and a half to 2 minutes to actually run through all of these different systems. But we can do it in an extremely short amount of time just by doing that. And we don't have to worry about whether or not something else might be down. So overall, it's just like with such a simple syntax, it makes these exceptionally smooth testing experiences where we can properly just test our part of the code in effectively, visual unit testing. It's been exceptionally powerful. So I think the next slide is our next steps. Pablo, if you would like to talk about where we're going from here.
Yeah. So we actually have quite a few things we want to move on from here. We established that we can get this done. It's like Kolia and Steve have mentioned, mocking has been a real big boost for us in general. And the next steps really are kind of building out some of the stuff we had built before for our tooling for Selenium and just kind of migrating it or trying to merge it with our existing systems. For example, we want to have alerting and trending on tests and find out, hey, this test didn't work, we need to take it out so it doesn't block the pipeline and we can keep our velocity high. We want to experiment some more with mobile testing. We definitely, like I mentioned before when I showed you a little bit of the code there, we want to get better about our guidelines and best practices for writing the code, and we're debating that still about what the best way to do that is. So I think the biggest thing for us to do on what's next is the tooling around Cypress and reporting and alerting and working with the dashboard and integrating into the developer pipeline. And basically building an ecosystem around the test writing that we're doing so we can be more efficient and know when something's wrong and fix things better and have a little more visibility for the rest of the team on how the health of the tests are doing. I think that covers it pretty good. I think that was all for me. I think the next slide is going to be maybe the resources part. So here we have a basically link to the website builder. That's what we work on. If you want to make a free website, you can try it. And Steve, you wanna take over?
Sure. Thanks, Pablo. Yeah, for resources on how to get started with Cypress, if you haven't already, just visit our website at Cypress.io. There's a prominent link along the top for docs. As Pablo mentioned, we've got extensive docs that help you get started super easily within a matter of a couple of minutes, as well as installing the test runner is super simple. Just a couple, 3 words on your command line, npm install Cypress. But then we also have guided tutorials, so make sure to check that out. One other link that we're also going to include in the follow-up email, and then we'll also post on our website next week, is the detailed write-up that GoDaddy actually wrote up around their whole process around this and how they're testing, which provides a greater technical details. So we'll make sure that gets into everyone's hands. All right, so let's go into our Q&A section. So we've had a couple of questions teed up by some participants already. If you have questions, feel free to continue adding them into the QA. We'll do our best to address as many as we can. Quick look at the clock. We've got about, we'll be able to set aside about 10 minutes for Q&A before we wrap things up. All right, so first question is from is here. So one of the attendees is asking, I'm having a hard time convincing my boss to get our team to fully adopt Cypress. What's the best way to convince them? What are the key benefits, and how should I actually go about convincing them to make this switch, or just take an initial look at it? So anyone from the from the GoDaddy team want to tackle that question?
Yeah, that was basically the question that was on my mind for like a year. That's honestly one of the hardest things to accomplish, to get the adoption. And I think even in my QA team, we had quite a few heated discussions about this. And the main thing that I've learned from that experience is that I'm trying to get Cypress integrated with our existing system, so that way it's not we're going to get rid of this and we're going to replace it with this. It's more like, how can we collaborate? And the other thing I learned too is that Cypress has advantages for our specific team that are worth investigating, right? And we've proven that it actually works. One thing that I should have mentioned a little bit earlier was, for example, we had an issue in Edge, right? So what we're going to do in Growth Team is we are going to make a Selenium test that tests using Soft Labs and Edge. Again, trying to say that it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can try to use the advantages of one and use the advantages of the other together, right? It doesn't have to be, I'm not ever going to write anything Selenium. Everything's going to be Cypress now. I don't think that's even what we want to do. And definitely that's something we're learning as we're doing this. Hopefully that's helpful to you.
Okay, thanks. And we've had somewhat related questions around parallelization, and with the volume of tests that you're executing, what's the impact that you've observed by utilizing parallelization?
I think we got parallelization working early on, but that's one of the things in our what's next. We want to increase the volume because we've seen other teams at GoDaddy who have started working on Cypress. I think we're up to 3 teams besides us now. So these are other things that we want to expand to. We want to improve it. We haven't had any problems. I know that when another team member, Scott, I don't know if he's on the line, but when he started doing it, it was, I think, like 34 minutes at first with no parallelization. Then we went down to 12 minutes or 9 minutes. So I think that hopefully answers your question. But I mean, it definitely works, and it definitely makes things faster. And I think, honestly, we're not taking enough advantage of it. I did notice in the dashboard, it says, hey, if you had 3 more executors or what have you, you could decrease your time by X amount, XYZ. And that's something that we have to do in the next phase of this evolution. So parallelization definitely works, and it definitely improves things. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thanks, Pablo. We got next question is from Brian, and his question is, given that end-to-end UI tests are so easy, does this change the testing pyramid at all? And are you still pushing for integration and unit tests?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something our team has been actively talking about a lot lately, especially the last couple of weeks. And Coley alluded to it earlier, that we're starting to move, and I think I saw another question later too about, we're starting to move to visual unit testing, meaning some of these super complex scenarios that have all these dependencies, we're starting to mock them more, but we still care about the actual entire process, right? For example, let's say upgrading. We still want to make sure that we're going to ecom and we're doing the upgrade, and the upgrade is still working. So we're considering those integration tests for us. And then we're basically also talking about critical tests, and these are the ones that are heavily mocked, meaning we want to know if anything in our code broke anything, meaning our code that we changed today, not the ecom change, not the other teams, but that we changed. So we're kind of putting things in two different buckets, right? The bucket of, did we make a code change ourselves in our own team that we did something wrong? And the second one is, we still are part of, you know, a company here and a lot of people. We still want to make sure that our processes work through the entire flow end to end in a real world scenario, like a real customer. So that's kind of where we're moving toward, and we're definitely that's kind of where we're settling at right now. I hope if that explains kind of our trajectory here.
Okay, thanks. So next question here is from Ben. Do you still manually test new features, or do you rely exclusively on automation? Following questions is, do you still run exploratory testing sessions? And if not, has there been any impact in not doing this?
Oh, I probably should have talked more about this in my earlier slides. And one thing that I'm pretty passionate about, people are always first, right? A human will catch way more things, I think, that a machine can. And we still do exploratory testing. When a new feature's out, we definitely test it very thoroughly ourselves, developers, QA, everybody. I think the main thing about this automation, in general automation, not just Cypress, but anything, is that it helps you do a lot of the heavy lifting, meaning regression, right? I'm not going to do 200 regression tests, but I will really spend a lot of time on this new feature, manually doing edge cases, things that a machine is just not going to think of. So I think it's, again, a little bit like the earlier question of Cypress versus Selenium. It isn't Cypress versus Selenium, it's Cypress and Selenium. And the same thing, it isn't automation versus people time, it's automation and people time. So we're using Cypress as a helper, right? But we still definitely want people in there talking and looking at things and asking, is this really right for the customer? What is the experience like? And that gives me more time to ask those questions, because Cypress is testing a lot of basic functionality that I don't have to click on a bunch of stuff anymore as much. But we definitely kept the ETs and all things like that.
Okay, great. So next question is another Selenium-related question, and posted anonymously. So the question is, I recall you mentioned you enabled both Selenium and Cypress to coexist and still harness the abilities of both. How are you doing that, and how do you feel that they best complement each other?
Well, I think a little bit when we spoke about the limitations, for example, we use Sauce Labs. We have used real devices before. We test on IE and Edge and Firefox and all these browsers. I know that Cypress is eventually going to get there too. But again, there are strengths in both sides. Like, for example, I feel that the strength of Cypress mocking is really good. And yes, we could do it in Selenium, but we already got it for free with Cypress. So let's just use Cypress for that a little bit more. So I think there's definitely a balance there. And like I said before, our growth team had a specific flow scenario cases that might not fit in every product, right? Like Editor right now, it needs to test on IE and all these other browsers when you rotate an image, right? So we want to keep that too. If anything, we're probably going to make some more Selenium tests in the growth team to complement the parts that we're not building with Cypress. Anyway, so I think, again, it's a handshake. It's not a one side or the other side.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so William and Olga both asked a similar question, and that is, what's the split between your tests that are visual unit testing versus end-to-end?
I think that also reflects a little bit of the earlier question is about the test pyramid. At least for us, we were heavily doing end-to-end, and just, recently we started moving away and kind of shifting that, like 80% end-to-end and 20% mocking. But I think eventually, like if we have a talk in a year, it's going to probably be 80% mocking and 20% end-to-end, because we want to know that the general flows work just for regular, real customers in our environment. But we want to test super complex scenarios, and that's just not going to happen with 12 different teams merging stuff into the test environment all the time. So that's where mocking is going to be a real big advantage here, and I see that growing in the future.
Okay, great. And so we've got time for one more question, and before we have to wrap things up. So this question is from Ben. How do you account for changes to your dependent API endpoints when using Cypress mocks?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things going on there. So we recently started researching, like I mentioned before, critical path test. We were gonna do like a mock and then our JSON object of what we're gonna send, say, to the cart team. And that's gonna be our verification that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. And then the end-to-end was gonna be the part where it actually goes through. And then if something breaks, that's when we're alerted. We're actually working on a different project. I don't know if this is what you were asking, but we have a different project that I'm working on. And that one is related to testing the APIs that we depend on and alerting us when something breaks. And then part of the project for this year is first letting people know that something is not working right in the environment that we all depend on. And the second phase of that is the test dynamically polling that service and saying, you know, is the login prompt down? Then I probably shouldn't run right now, right? Or you're gonna get a false positive. Or say, hey, is the ecom upgrading down right now? Then I'm gonna wait and then pull again and then try again later. Anyway, dealing with APIs and dealing with the health of APIs in a test environment, a very rapid scenario, that we're building out this other tool. And maybe I'll give a talk about that someday. But anyway, that's generally the direction we're going for that. We're building a separate tool for that.
Okay, fantastic. So I've seen quite a few other questions. We will try to make sure that we follow up on those individually post webinar. But we do have to wrap things up. I want to thank everyone from the GoDaddy team for sharing their experience with us, sharing their time with the Cypress community, and then also for all the great work that they're doing. I also want to thank everyone for joining today with the great questions. Hopefully this was helpful to you. As a reminder, we are going to send an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, as well as that survey link for our magical T-shirt. And that survey is super important for us because it's a great way for you to pass along your feedback to us on improvements that you want to see in the product, improvements in documentation, and it's also an opportunity for us to clarify any questions or things that weren't clear in this webinar or aren't clear in our website. So this is a great feedback mechanism for us. So that email will be coming tomorrow. We'll also post the recording of this webinar online probably next week or so. So thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully this was helpful and have a great day. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.